So the final method of factoring that we're going to cover is what I like to call the AC method. So I've written down the first two steps, and it turns out there's actually a couple more steps, but those we'll do as we come along. So when do we use this method? Well, we want to use this method whenever we have a quadratic expression where our a is not equal to 1. Now remember, a quadratic is of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So normally in the previous videos, we saw examples of how to factor quadratics where our a was equal to 1. And this time, what we're going to do is learn how to factor quadratics when our a is not equal to 1. So we have our example at the bottom. We want to factor 2x squared plus x minus 6. Okay, so going by our steps, the first thing we want to do is we want to calculate what is a times c. Now again, remember, for our quadratic, 2 represents our a. There's no coefficient in front of the x, so our b is 1, and our c is negative 6. Okay, so our first step is to calculate what is a times c. So a times c is 2 times negative 6. That's going to give us negative 12. Okay, so negative 12 is our value that we get. This is a times c. Our second step is we want to identify what two numbers add up to get our b, which was 1, and multiply to get our value from step 1. So what two numbers add up to get 1 and multiply to get negative 12? So what we're looking for is two values. Then when we add them together, we get 1. And when we multiply them together, we get negative 12. Now remember, if you're multiplying two numbers and you get a negative, that means one has to be negative, one has to be positive. So we want to keep that in mind. So I'm thinking that positive 4 and negative 3 would work. If we do positive 4 plus negative 3, you could also just think of that as 4 minus 3. That would come out to 1. And then if you multiply positive 4 and negative 3, that will give us negative 12. So our values are negative 3 and positive 4. Okay, so now here's where things sort of get a little bit odd, or at least I wasn't able to explicitly write them out as steps for our method. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this little 2x2 box. Okay, so I'm going to split this up like this. Now, in the top left, you put the first term of our quadratic. So in this case, that was 2x squared. And in the bottom right, you put the c, which was negative 6. Okay, so remember, our quadratic was 2x squared plus x minus 6. Top left is where our leading coefficient goes, 2x squared. Bottom right is where our c value, negative 6, goes. And now what we need to do is we're going to split our b into positive 4x and negative 3x. Remember, if we have positive 4x and negative 3x, that's going to give us 1x, which is exactly what our b value is. Now the kicker here is that we can actually place them wherever we want, and this method will still work. So I'm going to place the 4x over here and the minus 3x up here. And now what do we want to do? Well, what we want to do is we want to identify what we can factor from each row and column. So again, let me start with this row here. We have 2x squared and negative 3x. I want to determine what could I factor out of those two terms. Now, I can't factor any number out. 2 and 3 don't have any common factor in terms of a number, but they both have a variable in common, right? We have x squared and x, and so we could factor out an x from that row. Okay, so now what if I look at my bottom row? We have positive 4x and negative 6. So now I want to determine what could I factor out of these two. Now, I know that there's no variable here for the minus 6, so we can't factor a variable out. But what I do know is that they both are even, and so we could factor a 2 out of both of them. And so what we get here is a 2. Okay, so those are the rows. And now I want to go ahead and look at the columns. So we'll start with this column here. There we go. 2x squared and 4x. So again, I want to identify what is my GCF between these two terms. So 2x squared and 4x, they both have a 2 in common, and they both have a variable x in common. So we could factor out a 2x. And then finally, for negative 3x and negative 6, they both have a negative 3 in common. Now, why did I go through the whole trouble of making this whole box, factoring, and doing all this? Well, as it turns out, our quadratic 2x squared plus x minus 6 can be factored as what we got over here, which is x plus 2, and what we got over here, which is 2x minus 3. And this is the answer that we were looking for. And again, you want to remember, you can always check your work by foiling this out. Let's just do that here, just so we make sure what we got is accurate. X times 2x is 2x squared. X times negative 3 minus 3x. 2 times 2x, positive 4x. 2 times negative 3 minus 6. Combine like terms in the middle. And what we get is 2x squared plus x minus 6, which is exactly what we started with. So just to go through this one more time, the AC method, you want to use this when you have a quadratic with a not equal to 1. Your first step, calculate a times c. Second step, identify what two values add up to b and multiply to get AC, so your number from step 1. So when we did that here, 2 times negative 6 is negative 12, and we identified that positive 4 and negative 3 would add up to get b, and then also multiply to get our value from step 1. The next step is create our little box chart. Leading term goes in the top left, C term goes in the bottom right, and then here is where you get your, in this case it was 4x and negative 3x. Factor out from each row and column, and then that should give you those values on the outside, and your quadratic is equal to this value times this value.